people. All right. I'd like to dedicate this class to my grandfather, whose yahrzeit is today. His name was Avraham Tzvi Hersh Ben, the son of Aharon, the Levi. And just a little word about my grandfather. I was very moved last night when sort of impromptu, that we have a sort of extended cousins chat. There's not that much action on it. People occasionally post, for invitations to a wedding or a brit or a hair cutting, whatever. A little goes on every once in a while. And very impromptu, we're doing the Mishnayos to spell out our grandfather's name in honor of his yahrzeit. And it was just so beautiful to see how everyone got on board. People that never learn, people that do learn, people that don't learn. Everyone jumped in to take chapters. That the custom is that on a yahrzeit, you spell out the name of the one who passed away, and you study a chapter of Mishnah for each letter of the name. We study a chapter that begins with that letter. So for example, Avraham starts with an Aleph. So you study a chapter that begins with an Aleph, and then the Vase, etc. And that's how you spell out in learning in Mishnah the soul, because Mishnah, if you rejumble the letters, spells out the word neshama. Mishnah is the letters neshama, soul. So through Mishnah, we cause an elevation to the soul of the departed. And it was just so beautiful to see everyone jumping on, eager, happy to help, to bring elevation to our dear grandfather, who passed away a long time ago, over 20 years ago. My son, named after him, is 23 years old. And yet his memory, his legacy was so strong in all of us that we were so grateful to do that. Why was it so strong? Maybe because my grandfather was very hands-on involved. I don't know with his children, but I can definitely say for myself as a grandchild with the grandchildren, very, very hands-on involved. I remember so clearly walking me to the park and pushing me on the swing and teaching me to pump and taking me to this place and taking me to that place. Very hands-on. Oh, there's a picture of him. My mother's posting a picture of him right now. Very loving, very there for us. And I think because of that, we were also happy to be able to do things for him. So that's just a thought for ourselves as mothers, God willing, potential grandmothers, that as you are investing in your children and your grandchildren, there's a beautiful picture of my grandfather, very handsome man. As you are investing in your children and your grandchildren, it's such an investment in self, forever, ever, 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 ever. Shira's not on yet, but I'd like, in the name of the class, to wish her Mazel Tov for the beautiful engagement. If anyone somehow missed it, I don't know how you're gonna miss it, but if you missed it on the WhatsApp, we're all so excited that her oldest daughter, Kayla, is engaged, and we wish her much, much, much nachas. So this class should be an elevation for the soul of my grandfather and should help all of us to become better mothers, even more invested in our children, and continuing that very Jewish legacy of so being there for our children.
Amen.
Thank you. So we were discussing ourselves, talking about being mothers. The truth is we had this conversation last week because Shira, we spoke about investments, and Shira said putting her husband first, and someone said, what? Your husband first? Your kids are first. And I said, yes, your kids are first, and therefore put your husband first so he could be the father your children need. So yes, even though we're talking here about our relationship with our husband, our spouse, obviously the more we do to invest in that relationship, the more we're gifting our children with a mother, gifting our children with a father, gifting our children with a strong, loving, respectful marriage that give them the strength and stability and love they need to flourish and be the people that they deserve to be. So if we look back historically, the matriarchs, right? The first Jewish women out there that we know of were the matriarchs. Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, Leah, Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, Leah. And we see, if you just look through as it's written in the Torah portions, with a little commentary or even without, that they were different than the men. Obviously, it's not just nowadays. How do we see them different? They were, if I'm going to use the word, more grounded, which is no disrespect meant to Abraham, Isaac, or Jacob, to Abraham, Yitzchak, or Yaakov. No disrespect to the patriarchs. But they were more grounded because Sarah understood Ishmael's evil in a way that Abraham did not. And Rivka, Rebecca, understood Esau, her son, her firstborn son. She understood his evil in a way that Yitzchak, that Isaac did not. And it's very interesting talking about how a husband and wife should relate. You might throw this Devar Torah out to your husband or in front of him when you're talking to someone else. That God said to Abraham, Kol asher tomar lecha Sarah, shma b'kola. Whatever your wife Sarah says, listen to her voice. Just remember that line, right? Whatever your wife Sarah says, listen to her voice. Why? Because we see what men don't. That's the feminine energy. In other words, the basic point that is so strong in so many sources, you don't have to get Kabbalistic for this. I didn't say anything Kabbalistic yet, is that men and women are very different. We're not the same. We're different with different strengths. And therefore, men, listen to the voice of your wife. She probably knows what she's talking about. And this relates to our spiritual roots. So now we're going to get a little Kabbalistic. So if anything I say is not clear, please feel free to vocalize your question or write it as a chat. You can, as always, write it as a chat to the group or write it as a chat directly to me. So Kabbalistically, God has an essence name. It has 4 letters, a Yud and a Hey and a Vav and a Hey. That is the most foundational name of God. God has 7 names and 70 terms we use to refer to him as. There's 70 terms, like, for example, Makom is a term, a reference to God. But there are 7 names, 7 holy names that we only pronounce in prayer and a blessing when we're saying a complete verse. Of those 7 names, the holiest name is a name of 4 letters, a Yud and a Hey and a Vav and a Hey. Kabbalistically, they take those 4 letters, the Yud and the Hey. This is pretty heavy duty Kabbalah, so please ask if it's not clear. The Yud and the Hey and the Vav and the Hey, they spell each one out because really every letter can be extended. So Yud is just like one little letter, Yud, but if you spell it out, it's Yud, Vav, Dalid, Yud. If you're not familiar enough with Hebrew to understand this, don't worry, just let it pass over your head. But if you are, Yud, Yud, Vav, Dalid, Yud. There's no other way to spell the word Yud, so we're safe there. No options. But we said the name has 4 letters, Yud and Hey and Vav and Hey. So Yud is always spelled Yud, Vav, Dalid, Yud, that's it. But Hey and Vav have various options. Again, I'm going to say this. You can question it. If you know you're not understanding because you don't know Hebrew well enough to understand, don't worry. But if you do know Hebrew well enough to understand and you have a question, ask. So Hey could be spelled out Hey, Hey, or Hey, Aleph, Hey. Vav could be Vav, Vav, or Vav, Yud, Vav, or Vav, Aleph, Vav. So the Hey and the Vav has various ways of spelling them out. The Yud does not. The Yud is always Yud, Yud, Vav, Dalet. But the Hey and the Vav could have an Aleph in between, could have nothing in between, could have a Vav in between, could have a Yud in between. Why do we care? Because this world is actually words. This yoga block is a word of God that's vivifying, and then that's how it exists in exactly its shape and dimension and color and texture and everything. It's a word of God. When the redemption comes, when Mashiach comes, we're going to look here and see the God energy that creates this. Now I just see the yoga block. But words, God's words are very significant. Could you imagine God's name? And numbers, the numerical value is very significant, meaning every letter is a number in English as well. A is 1 and B is 2, and I think J is 10. Don't ask me what like T is. I don't know. Why? Because we don't really use it functionally. It's not really relevant, the numerical value of the letters of the ABC. But in Judaism, it's very relevant. And we all know the value of every single letter because it's almost interchangeable. The letter as a letter, the letter as a number, right? You all know the value of Yud and of Chaf and of Pei and of Tzadik. Probably most of you know that. Why? We don't have numbers? We have numbers. But the letter symbolizes a number which is intrinsically valuable to us because this world, know it or not, be consciously aware of it or not, is words. And every word is comprised of letters. And every letter has a numerical value. And that numerical value is the energy coursing through to create that object. So the word of God that's vivifying this is a very specific letters, order of letters, number of letters, and the numerical value of that makes this this. And if the word was different, this wouldn't be this, it would be something else. Little minor crash course of Kabbalah 101. So when we're talking about God's name, and we're talking about God's most essence name, how it's spelled out, and I'm telling you there's various ways to extend it, says which energy of God is flowing. So we have the most foundational name, Yud Hey Vav Hey. We have 4 different ways to spell it out. Did I make up this? No. All the way back. Very, very ancient Kabbalistic premise. Those 4 ways it's spelled out create 4 different numerical values. The numerical values are representing the energy. This all has to do with men and women. That's why I'm saying this. The energy of God flowing through that name. So the lowest name is called Ma. Ma has numerical value of 45. So again, some people have jumped on as I'm talking. I'm going to give a little brief summary of what I'm saying now. We are talking about the Kabbalistic source of men and women. To understand that, we are talking about God's most holy name, the 4-letter name of Yud and Hey and Vav and Hey. And we're explaining that according to, if you just simply said the numerical value, Yud and a Hey and a Vav and a Hey is 26. But we can extend that by spelling out each letter. So Yud becomes Yud Vav Dalet. Simple. That's the only way we can spell out Yud. What's Hey? Hey Hey, or Hey Aleph Hey, or Hey Yud Hey, or Hey Vav Hey. All those say Hey. Hey Aleph, Hey. So depending on how it's spelled out, that's how I'm extending the energy of this name. And there are 4 classical spellings according to Kabbalah. Ma, Ban, Sag, and Ab, which are the numerical value of 45, 52, 63, and 72. Put 63 and 72 on the side. I just said that for the completion of the concept. Nothing to do with what we're talking about tonight. We're talking about 45 and 52. 45 is the name, the Kabbalistic name. If you ever are in any Kabbalah course, you might hear this, the Kabbalistic name Ma. And 52 is the Kabbalistic name Ban. Ma and Ban. 2 of the 4 configurations of God's holiest name. Through these 4 configurations, everything of the physical and of the spiritual have their essence energy. And now let's get back to men and women. Men come from the energy of Ma, 45. Women come from the energy of Ban, 52. They're 45, Ma. We're 52, Ban. So who cares? Well, the reason why I'm bringing this in is because we do care, because we're trying to understand men and women, and what Torah says and what Kabbalah says is a very good insight to ourselves and our relationships. So what's the difference of the energy of 45 and the energy of 52? Well, the basic rule of thumb is the greater the number, the greater the power. So they're 45, we're 52. They come from God's name of Ma. We come from God's name of Ban. So right away, I mean, in your face, it's saying that women have a power that men do not. This is not ego. This is not, we want to feel superior. This is a simple Kabbalistic fact. Ma is 45. Ban is 52. They come from Ma. We come from Ban. So if you ever feel frustrated that you're so much more spiritual than your husband, guess what? It's not his fault. I mean, what do you expect from the poor guy? He's from Ma, you're from Ban. Of course you're more spiritual. Now, what else do we understand besides the fact that we're more powerful and more spiritual, which you probably knew before you got on tonight? What else you understand is that actually Ma, for reasons I'm not going to be able to explain now so clearly, is a more refined energy. For example, just as there's a man and woman, Ma and Ban, 45, 52, there's also our soul and our body. Our soul comes from Ma, and our body comes from Ban. Our soul comes from 45, and our body comes from 52. Ma, man, soul, Ban, body, women. So my soul comes from less than my body? Yes, because actually there's enormous God energy in the body, but the body is far more physical, far more coarse than the soul. So Ma reflects a weaker godliness, but more refined, more remote, more detached from the physicality of this world. So when you're frustrated at your husband that he just doesn't get it, again, what are you blaming him? This is a spiritual source. And he especially doesn't get how things work, like he doesn't pick up the cues you're seeing. Again, what are you blaming him for? This is a spiritual source. Ban, our spiritual source, 52, besides being more powerful, is more integrated in the physical. And actually, the word Ban, as I said, words and their numeration are very significant in Jewish thought. Ban is the same numerical value as the word behema. A behema means an animal. So why is Ban this more intense energy than Ma, the same numerical value as animal? Because again, that's part of the point. Ban is more physical, in a sense, more coarse, more grounded in this world, and much more powerful God energy. And that's a woman versus a man. So again, when we're looking at these things, it's for us to really understand, again, a lot of basic points like, yes, he might not be as tuned into God as I am. I'm 52, he's 45. Yes, he might not get things that I just get automatically. I know how to read the energy in my house and read my kids. Just again, remember what we said. We started off by talking about the matriarchs of matriarchs. And Rivka saw what Yitzchak didn't. And Sarah saw what Abraham didn't. Abraham couldn't see something that Sarah could see. Mm-hmm. Yitzchak couldn't see something that Rivka could see. Mm-hmm. Your husbands don't see what you see. Mm-hmm. It's all part of our spiritual source. So instead of getting frustrated when they don't see it, when they don't get it, instead of getting frustrated when you feel you care so much more about connecting to God, perhaps, than they do, understand there's a reason for everything. And they have advantages too. There's an advantage to Ma. There's a bigger advantage to Ban, but okay. There's an advantage to Ma as well. But really understanding that our strengths are not because you're better, because you've developed yourself more, because it's you as a woman. That's the energy of a woman. Just as I said, that Ma is the soul and Ban is the body. Now you're like, well, that's weird because that means the body's energy is more than the soul's, but like the body's physical and the soul's spiritual. Well, it says by Mashiach that the soul will be fed by the energy of the body. Meaning in energy, the body's got more God in it than soul. In actualization today, the soul seems a lot more spiritual. But in potential energy, the body has much more. And sort of similarly, by Mashiach, it's going to be revealed the dominancy of the energy of the woman for the same reason. Much more powerful. Might not be revealed today, might not be appreciated today. But that's why we specifically can utilize the physical for God and bring God into the physical. And what we were discussing about bringing God into the physical was bringing God into the physical of intimacy. And also there, you might find that you're just so much more able to do it than your husband for the same reason. Why can't he do it this way? Same issue. He's Ma, you're Bon. He's 45, you're 52. You have both a higher energy and a greater ability to connect this to the physical. So what is more physical than intimacy? And where should God more be found than in intimacy? So who of the two of you can do this best? You can. You can try to bring him along. I'm not saying don't, but he's never going to do it as well as you. And don't view this as a limitation of his. Understand that it's just him being a man. Not, and I don't mean that in a negative way. I mean him embodying his spiritual source, the same way we embody our spiritual source. Any questions or thoughts on any of this before I go further? Okay. Another Kabbalistic thought. So this was one paradigm of Kabbalah, ancient paradigm. Nothing new here. This has been known for thousands of years, if you're a Kabbalist. But I wanted to bring it in because I feel it's relevant for us to understand. And if we understand, we can so much lessen our frustration, and we can so much more appreciate their strengths and our strengths. So someone just asked a question. Let me just read it because it's sort of flicked on and off my screen. What can be done to elevate a man's spirituality, or it's not from the women? Okay, that's a great question. Here I'm telling you, listen, he's 45, you're 52. Like, he's not going to be as spiritual as you. Well, but there's lots of things we can do to elevate a man's spirituality. Practical things I can tell you, more spiritual things I can tell you. I'll just throw out a few ideas, and anyone else can chime in with their voice or with the chat. I'm sure many of us have been looking to over the years to see how we elevate our husband's spirituality and strengthen them. So she said, or it's not from the woman. That was her second chat. I don't know who Galaxy A12 is, so I'm sorry, I'm saying she. Yes, in a sense, you're right. A woman is not her husband's spiritual mentor. You are not your husband's rabbi. Never try to be. That is not the road to family harmony. So anything you're going to do to strengthen your husband spiritually is going to be done discreetly. It's going to be done with tact. It's never going to be like, why don't you get up and go to shul? And why don't you learn? And you would feel so much better if you davened with a minyan, or if you davened, or if you put on tefillin, or no, that's not our role. So no, we are not our husband's rabbis. We are not their mentors. So that's what you mean by it's not from the women, correct. But at the same time, in a more subtle way, there are things we can do to help them spiritually. One thing we can do, of course, as we think with our children, and I don't mean this in a patronizing way at all, I'm just saying it in the way we can all understand, you know, like catch them when they're good. You catch your child when they're doing it right, and you really, really milk out that moment. So it's the same thing with your husband in a subtle way, not in a patronizing way, not in an overt way, not in a like you're trying to, no, subtly, not overbearingly, but appreciate the good. Appreciate it. And when, if there's, especially if there's a good marriage, when he sees that that's what makes my wife happy, he has much more investment in going that road. That's what impresses you. That makes you happy. That's what you're excited about. That's what you tell the children. That's what you tell your mother when he's around, but not talking to him. You know, those things really just in a very practical way. And you could use that tip for also taking out the garbage, you know, in a very practical way that helps a man. In a more spiritual way, something that can help a man is, and this also doesn't just apply to a man, it doesn't just apply to your husband, this applies to anyone. You can help someone else spiritually by finding the same, ideally, by finding the same issue in yourself and working on it and telling God that this goes to his or her bank account. For example, don't just apply with your husband. Let's say you have a daughter that struggles with gossip. You have a son that struggles with anger. You have a close friend that struggles with depression. It could be anything and anyone. That's why I gave just random examples. You can say, wow, I'm going to work on being even more careful in guarding my words, in controlling my emotions, in being upbeat and happy, even when I don't feel like it. And I'm telling God, this isn't for me. This is for her. This is for him. This is for her. And it literally works that way. So the same way, and how much more so with your husband, because you and your husband are literally one soul. So there's no one you can do this more powerfully than with your husband. The same way you can say to God, if you see, for example, that your husband doesn't daven, or doesn't care much when he davens, or doesn't learn, or doesn't have a lot of God-fearingness, or, you know, whatever the story is, you increase in that area and tell God, this is not for me. This is for him. This should inspire him. I'm strengthening the weakness in him. Everything I go stronger in goes directly to help him in this area. It's very powerful. I have given many people this advice from different people. You know, I'm saying nothing to do with your husband, it could be for anyone in the world that you care about. But the closer you are to them, in a sense, it's more impactful. And I've really seen miracles come out from this. So again, yes, you're not his rabbi or mentor. Don't do anything overt. Yes, you care very much, and you can, in a very practical way, show your appreciation for whatever you see in that area that you want to strengthen. And in a very spiritual way, you can help strengthen that area by strengthening yourself, ideally in that same area. I have seen sometimes, I have had a situation, I remember a situation with someone with a child with tremendous issues, and a couple on their road to Judaism, and the husband took on putting on tefillin for that child. And his issue had nothing to do per se with tefillin. And there was like almost instant miracles that happened then. Very powerful. So it doesn't always have to be in the area of weakness, but ideally that's the best. Does anyone else have other ideas? Again, I'm just pulling out a few. There are many, many more. Anything else someone would advise? You could advise it with your voice. You could advise it with a chat to strengthen your husband spiritually. Firma.
Not really that. It's more of a question. I feel like then we're kind of blaming ourselves in a way if our husbands are doing that. Like if we feel that's on our shoulders, I feel like there's only so much we can do. And we have to also remember that it's not our fault if he's going to be doing X, Y, and Z. So we shouldn't feel like it's like our fault or our bad thing that we're doing, because we
No,
are
God
trying,
forbid. I was not sure. I'm so sorry if that's how it came out. Nobody here needs to add more guilt to their plate. If you're Jewish, your plate is very full of guilt. So no trying to add any more. I was trying to respond to the question, can we help them? And the answer is yes. But if you do not have the wherewithal right now to do that, then you don't. And you can you're focusing on something else with your strength. But if you feel, I really want to help him because helping him is helping my children, is helping the family, is helping the mood in the house. So he's a worthwhile investment. Here are tips, physical tips, spiritual tips. If you can't do that right now, please, no, don't take guilt for your husband. And by the way, don't take guilt for your kids either. We're always so good to credit to God the good and to accept for ourselves the blame. You can give God for both. However amazing
about,
your
like-
children are, you can give God the credit. And if there's any problems, you can give God the credit. So the same thing goes with your husband.
Sorry, what about like if you feel like you've done a lot, like you feel like you have done a lot of those examples that you've done. Like,
And you're saying you still don't see a change?
Yeah.
Meaning you've done both and yet you feel like he's not shifting. He should, if you've done both sincerely. Again, I don't mean for 2 weeks, but I don't think you're saying for 2 weeks. If you really don't see a shift when you're sincerely doing both of those, I would check your tefillin and mezuzahs. In general, whenever there's any problem in your life, physical or spiritual, check your tefillin and mezuzahs. If you say my husband doesn't have tefillin, well, then buy the tefillin and then check them. And the mezuzahs. Because sometimes physical and spiritual issues are really coming. It's scary from flaws in tefillin and mezuzahs. And sometimes, even if there are no flaws, the very act of checking the tefillin and mezuzahs, as I know we've discussed in this class, I have personally seen people I've recommended to check their tefillin and mezuzahs, and literally while they were checking, miracles happened. And the tefillin and mezuzahs were fine. But the very act of checking them really created salvation. But I definitely have, just personally, not stories I read in a book or heard third hand, personally, many people, because I've told many people to check tefillin and mezuzahs, and I have seen tremendous things that come out because sometimes there are problems. And when there's problems, it doesn't work. So if someone was sincerely doing both, like consistently for a good 3 months, and they don't see any shift at all, then I would definitely tell them to check their tefillin and mezuzahs, because my suspicion would be there's some blockage. And tefillin and mezuzahs can be blockage. Now, of course, blockage could come from other areas also. A blockage could be kosher, which means maybe you're doing something that's not 100% kosher. I'm saying kosher from food. Or maybe you are, but your husband's not eating kosher outside the house. And that not kosher food could be affecting him tremendously. On a higher level, now this might sound like a huge jump, but the Lubavitcher Rebbe says that not Chalav Yisrael creates doubts and belief in God. That's a very heavy statement to say, but from a very reputable source. And therefore, if there was a feeling that your husband's struggling with his basic relationship with God, again, that might be a very big jump for you. And you can say, well, I can't deal with what he eats outside the house, but maybe in the house, that would be something to consider. Again, because that is, that's what the Lubavitcher Rebbe says. Lack of Chalav Yisrael creates doubts and belief in God. Very, very strong statement, and said by someone who loves Jews very much. So that would be another thing to consider. In other words, like, is there a real blockage? Because if there's not a real blockage, those two tips work very, very well. I've seen it many times with people. Any other tips people want to share on this very, very relevant question? You could say it, you could chat it. Well, not sure I'd hear some noise, but I think it's more child than someone talking. I'll just throw in, this is not per se only limited to your husband. I know this is something we've said many times, but it's so true. Tehillim and tzedakah. Those should be easily accessible in your toolbox, right on the top. So definitely I recommend anyone who really wants to help their husband, or just even a bit wants to help their husband because it doesn't take so long, to say his chapter of Tehillim every single day, his chapter of Psalms. His chapter is his age plus a year, because your year is really your age plus a year. To help him and to help anyone else in your world that you love and want to bring God's kindness and compassion to. And charity, it's so easy to put a coin in the charity box and to say, this is from him. This is for opening his heart. This is for opening his mind. This is for opening his soul. Charity is so easy and so powerful. And Psalms are so easy and so powerful. Those two tools, I feel, the third Lubavitcher Rebbe, Tzemach Tzedek, says, if we knew the power of Psalms, we'd just be saying them all day long. So definitely, besides everything we said, his chapter of Psalms, a coin every day for him. Easy things. The other stuff aren't as easy. That's easy. It's not the only thing you should do, but definitely it always helps. It sweetens the passage very, very, very strongly. I'll continue now with another Kabbalistic understanding of men and women after the one we just did. Since we're sort of between and just had a commercial break anyway, a side discussion, I'm going to repeat what I said in the beginning of the class. For Shira, who was not on the very first moment, she might be a little busy, that we started first dedicating class to my grandfather, and then giving a very big mazel tov to Shira, who's very involved in this class and had it in her house as long as we could have it in person. And it was so special in person, but it's so nice on Zoom that so many people can attend, but it was so special in person. So really the whole class wants to wish Shira a tremendous mazel tov for Kayla, for her oldest daughter's engagement. And we're so happy for the whole family, and should just continue brachos, brachos, brachos the whole road through. So getting back. So getting back. So we spoke about, we're speaking using a Kabbalistic paradigm of God's most holy name. Men are 45, we are 52. By definition, we're stronger spiritually. That's why we're more spiritually tuned than they are. By definition, we have a better grip on the physical world. That's why we get things that they don't get. And by definition, we can bring godliness into the physical. That's why we can bring godliness into intimacy in a way that they probably can't. Don't get frustrated. Don't look down on them. Understand they have a tafkid. They have a mission with their energy, and we have one with ours, and we have to live up to ours. And then we spoke about how to help them with theirs. Now, another different Kabbalistic thought about men, women, and marriage. This is a different thought. Of course, the two do not contradict at all, but it's another understanding of men and women of marriage, is that women, and I know this one, the one I said before, I don't think I ever shared because it's sort of complicated to explain God's whole name. So, but this one I know I've touched on, and it's very important. So I really want to bring this out very clearly, is that women come from God's feminine energy. Men come, as makes logical sense, from God's masculine energy. God's masculine energy are the 6 emotive powers of God. God's feminine energy is the final power of God, the lowest power, and actually they're not 7, there are 10, because there are 3 intellectual higher than men or women, so to speak, which is called Malchus, sovereignty. That's a woman's energy. We're from Malchut, we're from Malchus, we're from sovereignty, and the men are from the 6 emotions, which are in the world of theory higher, because you have the 3 intellectual, then you have the 6 emotions, the masculine energy, and then you have the final of these 10, which is sovereignty, which is the feminine energy. Now, why is that significant? What does it mean? Well, that's by PS, the reason why we say women are the ones, our sages say women are the ones that are going to bring the redemption. Our sages say living with the times, right? We just got out of Egypt 2 weeks ago and celebrated the splitting of the sea last week. So our sages have their famous line, famous because we know it very well, in the merit of the holy women of Egypt, we were all redeemed, and in their merit we will be redeemed in the future. And another saying of the sages, every generation was redeemed in the merit of the women. So why are they saying this? Because women embody God's sovereignty, Malchus, Malchut. And that's the energy of Mashiach. So since we embody the energy of Mashiach, we are, of course, the pivotal players in bringing it. Now, that's nice, but what does that have to do with marriage? Because Malchut is a very interesting dimension. Women are very interesting people. It is the 10th and final attribute of God. Officially, it is empty. It has nothing. Kabbalistically, the phrase is, to impress you with Aramaic, les le migarmuhu klum, which means she has nothing of her own. She's an empty vessel. Our spiritual source, Malchut, God's 10th and final dimension. So what is this thing that has nothing? It's the energy of receiving. She has nothing and she has more than anything else because she's empty and therefore is the repository of all of the 9 higher dimensions. She absorbs all 9, and then she can express it in a way they can't, which is why, again, we're talking here purely, we're not talking about us yet, even though it might sound exactly like us, but this is literally Kabbalah, again, 101, understanding God's dimensions. God's feminine dimension is the lowest, the bottom of the barrel. God's feminine dimension starts off empty. God's feminine dimension absorbs all of the higher energies and therefore is more full than any of them. And God's feminine dimension is the energy of creation, because God creates with Malchut. God creates with sovereignty. This is explaining you. This is Kabbalah's understanding of God's femininity, and therefore of ourselves as the human embodiment of this. We are the embodiment of God's feminine dimension. So everything we said here is us. Officially, I mean, in the world's view, on the bottom, historically, that's been the role of women. And now women are trying to compensate for that by saying they're just like men. Again, sort of saying women are on the bottom, but we're not women, we're men with a slightly different body. We're women, and it looks on the bottom. We start off empty because our nature is to be a recipient. There needs to be a space to be a receiver. If you're so full of self, you don't know how to receive. You have no space to receive. There needs to be a space to receive. That's our energy. We're meant to be recipients. And then as healthy recipients, we get so much. We can absorb so much that from us comes creation. Of course, creation in the most practical sense. We give birth to children. We nurture them physically and spiritually. A Jewish child is nurtured by the spirituality of a Jewish mother. But in all dimensions, the creative energy in the home is the woman. Again, because we're superior, because we're women, because that's God's energy. So we keep coming back to this issue. This is not the first time I explained to you that we are Malchut, we are God's sovereignty embodied. And of course, I have more to say about this. But again, the most practical thing, again, is our energy is to be a recipient. The antithesis of how the world has told us how we're supposed to be, how we're supposed to be successful, how we're supposed to be cool, how we're supposed to be tough, how we're supposed to make it in life. So, because I know you've heard this before, would anyone like to chime in, be real and chime in on how she has stretched herself to be a recipient in her relationship with her husband? You can say it, you can chat it to me, and I will read it for everyone.
I have something. Can you hear me?
Mhm.
Okay. Like when I want to do something and have like my opinion and do it my way, I will try to like give him the chance to do it and let him be like the mashpia. And it's not always the way I want it, but you always taught us that if you give the man the control and you allow him to be it, then he'll be able to. So there's definitely times where I'm like, I want like things done very specifically, and I know he's not doing like that at all. And I'm like, it's okay. This one I can just like let go of. And then I do see a difference where he does feel like, oh wow, should I make a decision finally? Or, he does feel more like the man in the house, which I think also the kids see, and it's very healthy. I don't do it often, but when I do it, I do find like
you do it carefully by those issues that you say, all right, if he doesn't do it right, I can, this one we can mess up.
Right. And it's also getting harder with like more kids. So I'm not able to be as on top of everything the way I used to be. So I am trying to find the things that I could let him do and slip up, with, and not care as much. There won't be as much damage.
Great. That is a perfect example of a stretch. It's a very hard stretch because a lot of us want to be in control and want it done right. And if he does it, it might not be done as right. But besides the practical thing of, but I just don't have time to do it all, which might be a good factor in letting him do it and you being the recipient by allowing him to be the giver, it's also really, really helping him be a man. And you know, the more you're a woman, the more you help him be a man, and the more everyone gains. Anyone else? I think everything Shira said was exactly on board. Can you do it all the time? No, some things you're not willing, you know, damage control. And you don't want him to do it and you fix it. That's even worse. But some things you can just say, and it shouldn't be rare. You can say, it's okay. It's not ultimately so important. It's more important that he is the giver. That I love the way you said it, that I let his voice be heard. And there was a couple I was talking to. It was really that point of the man literally saying, I want my voice to be heard. And it was like, yeah, let's find an area, a safe area, an area that you're willing to give up control and let his voice be heard. Let him be the man, let you be the woman. And this is the best way to have a healthy relationship. And the first beneficiary is him, is you, is the kids, is all of the above. Anyone else can share how they have stretched themselves to be a recipient in their relationship with their husband. Again, you don't have to say it. You can write it. You can send it to me to say.
I try to be the recipient by literally being the recipient, whether it's to my husband or kids. Like, you know, when someone's like not having the greatest day or moment and you kind of let them vent, as opposed to being like, don't talk to me that way, or don't say that, just let them go at it and kind of like just receive it. And sometimes you don't even need to say anything, or, you know, just try and make them feel better. But going on with what we just said, kind of letting things go, but also like receiving someone's frustration and not taking it where it shouldn't go further.
Absolutely. And sometimes when you do that, I had a little incident today with one of my children. And sometimes when you do that, what you just have to tell yourself is, this is what I tell myself: be professional. You know, for each one of what professional means, put on your therapist hat, or put on your teacher hat, put on your rabbi hat, you know, put on your counselor hat, put on your how you treat strangers hat. You can do it professionally. It's just like, you know, something we all need to do all the time to screen our words. And for those of you that work in the work world, we screen our words all the time. Obviously, we have no choice. But when we're home, we just don't bother. And when we're home, it's even more important. So a lot of times those professional, societal norms, civilized ways of behavior are really very impactful if you use them at home with the people you love the most. And definitely just letting someone talk and listening, and especially if you messed up, and saying, I hear you, and I understand you're frustrated. I understand I did something that bothered you. Just letting them talk and just listening and listening and listening and listening. Yes, that's being a recipient. It's allowing myself them.
It's not directed at me. And, you know, sometimes you feel like they're coming at you, and then I have to step back and be like, this is not about me. Just let them go at it and let them kind of de-stress.
And as you do it, you could daven, you could pray. I'm saying I literally was sometimes, as I am dealing with like a child in that space, as I'm listening, I'm davening, I'm praying to God, help. I know what I'm supposed to be doing. I'm doing it, but I need your help here. Help. And God kicks in, and he does. And things can turn out so wonderfully. And it's a tip someone gave me. I mean, she wasn't giving it to me, give me a tip, but she was sharing something she developed to work with her children. This is really for children. It can't hurt with your husband as well. But in terms of community, she was saying how she is a very devoted mother who, like the rest of us, doesn't have time to be a devoted mother, but wants to be a devoted mother. And what she started doing, which she says helps her so much, because she's always trying to find time to have meaningful interactions with her children, but she doesn't have that much time, right? So she said she was taking all of her meaningless interactions, like, it's time to go to bed, come for supper, let's do your homework, all those types of interactions that you're doing all day with your kids, but they're not meaningful interactions. And she tries to engage all 5 senses as she does that meaningless interaction. And she said it makes it very meaningful. Like she looks at the child, which sort of means you can't call from the hall or something. She goes over to the child. She looks at the child, make eye contact. She stands close. She touches the child. She's really getting into their space to say, please take a shower now. Please get ready for bed. We need you to do your homework, supper time, you have to put away your toys, all the things she'll be saying all day. But she's connecting at the same time. And it's such a nice little tip of really, we as the recipients of the energy, we're so in tune. We can absorb all that energy and really help them just by those little extra touches. Anyone else has a way they have stretched themselves to be a recipient, specifically if possible, in your relationship with your husbands? Because it's a stretch. Okay, well, I'll go on. We got 2 fabulous answers. And sometimes when someone gives such a fabulous answer, you feel like, oh, I feel stupid adding my little thing. But I always feel everyone's thing is so beneficial because there's so many different ways to do this, right? And when I hear an idea of something I'm not doing, it makes me think, oh, maybe I can incorporate that also. Maybe that's another way I could stretch. So never feel my little example. I trust many people are stretching, many people are doing it, and please feel free to share. Maybe not this class, maybe another class. And you could always just chat it to me privately, and then I read it. Now we said sovereignty. Oh, someone just put something up. All right, I guess I encourage someone to chat something now. Let's see. Oh, it's to everyone. Okay, great. That's another really great way of being a recipient. If everyone didn't catch the chat, the recipient is to back up your husband, even if you really disagree with what he's saying, but to back him up, which is you're receiving what he's giving now the family, and you're of course giving him the respect to build him up to be the one that's giving the family. And you're saying to the children, yes, we listen to Tati, we have to listen to Daddy, we have to listen to our father. Now, again, the caveat she put in is like, or what really makes it the stretch is she doesn't agree with what he's saying, actually. But of course, there's maybe a little bit of a disclaimer of, I don't always do this. It's just if I could say, sort of like what Shira said, I give him a job. If I could say, all right, the job's not done so well, it's not such a big deal. I could back him up if I don't really agree with him, but it's not such a big issue, which is great, which is a big stretch. Now, I want to comment on that one. If you disagree with him, and it's a big deal, it's still better to disagree in a soft way. It's very important to disagree, not in front of the kids, because when we shatter their father in their eyes, again, who lost? He did, they did, and we did. Loss. Even if their father's doing a lot of wrong, if they don't realize it, don't shatter him in their eyes. Even if you're really upset, don't shatter him with their eyes. It's a tremendous blow to them and to him and to you. So if your husband says something you disagree with, like, come, you have to sit down and eat supper right now, and you're like thinking, oh, it's okay, I'll play a few more minutes. No, he said it. You can back him up on it. It's fine. You have to listen to daddy, you have to listen to tati, you have to listen to Abba. That's a great way of you receiving his energy and following it, even if you wouldn't do that or necessarily agree with it. Now, he says something you totally disagree with. If you leave the table, that's it, no dessert. And you think that's so wrong. Don't say anything. Let it be. You might not vocally back it up, but don't disagree with it. And then when nobody's around, you could sort of discuss it with him and explain and shift it. But especially in front of the kids, very good to just receive and back up. Anyone else have something they'd like to share? Because that was very practical. Probably happens a lot in your homes. Very practical. And yes, even if you disagree, you could still back up a lot of what he's saying, because as Shira said about what she was talking about, it's not always such a big deal. It has to be like my way. I can receive his energy. I want to build him up. I want him to feel like I'm supporting him. That's how I make him the best him, is by me giving him my support, by being the recipient. So sovereignty is God's power of creation. Sovereignty is God's speech, right? We were given a lot of that because that's God's speech. God creates through speech. That's a feminine power. Creation, speech as a means of giving. This is how Kabbalah is explaining a female energy. Now, when we spoke about you stretching yourself to be a recipient really means to be a nurturer. In other words, you might think a recipient, but do you want to be a nurturer? Well, guess what? To be a recipient is to be the nurturer. And I think like Dorit's example was very to this concept. As she was receiving the energy, she's nurturing. The act of receiving was very obvious in that example, the act of nurturing. So again, understanding not the world's vision of me, women that want to be men are conquerors, women that want to be conquerors. I want to be true to myself. I want to be feminine. I want to be recipient and therefore a nurturer of my husband, a nurturer of my marriage, a nurturer of my children, a nurturer of the world around, a nurturer of God. So does anyone want to, I know we're a little bit late, but can anyone think of a time when they stretched themselves to be more of a nurturer than was natural, and they really felt good within when they did so? Because in any of the examples we had, which we had 3, thank you for Shira, for Dorit, and for Galaxy, you might not feel good about it, but you know what you're supposed to do and you're doing it. But has anyone had experience either being a recipient, stretching to be a recipient, or stretching to be a nurturer, and you really felt good? The reason why I'm asking this, let me be very transparent, is because you should feel good doing this, because this is being true to yourself. My energy is a recipient. My energy is a nurturer. So when I'm stretching to be a nurturer and a recipient, I'm stretching to be me. I'm stretching to be true to me, not what the world has told me, but really what I am. And therefore, it should really feel good. Does anyone, you don't even have to say the details if you don't want to, but has anyone had this experience and really felt good, felt healthy, felt real within themselves? Okay. Felt real within themselves when they were doing this? I can say for myself with the time moving on, but I always feel that, because for me it's a stretch. It's for sure sometimes a stretch, and it always feels like such a healthy stretch. It feels like, oh, this is really how I am how I'm really wired to be. And it feels so good to be in my inner space. Like, for example, like again, like it was mentioned last week, that our most important job is to be a mother. And when we're really mothering right, it feels so good. Because that's what we are in essence. And the world might give us different messages about what we are. But that's really what we are. And when we're doing it, it feels good. So Aviva just added to her chat that yes, when she is supporting her husband, it feels right. It feels like we're a team. It feels like we're giving security to the kids. And that feels good. It feels good to be doing what you know you want to do, being the wife and mother that you want to be. And that, again, that's us. We're the nurturers. Again, that's why a Jewish mother produces a Jewish child, because we are those nurturers. A man's a conqueror. He can't nurture that spark of God. We can, and we do. Just, again, we don't really have time to discuss it so much, but understand, obviously, this idea of being a recipient, and especially this idea of being a nurturer, is not only for your husband, it's not only for your children. We all, in essence, core definition of self, are nurturers. And that's really for the whole world. But the more I can appreciate him as what he's meant to be, a man, a giver, an influencer, a dominant voice, the more I can help him access being that influencer. How? By being the real recipient. When I'm a real recipient, I'm helping him elicit his energy. When I'm acting as a real woman, I help him be a real man. When I'm truly not faking it, we can fake it, we might even fake it well, but the more it's true, the more powerful it's going to be. When I truly feel as the recipient, I'm empowering him to be a man, to be the influencer, to be the giver. He's at his healthiest then, and so am I. I'm at my healthiest when I'm the true recipient that elicits him to be the true giver. He's at his best. I'm at my best. The marriage is at its best, and the children are at their best. It's not always easy. It really isn't. It might be so against our nature, and it might seem so against his nature. But when you really get to your true womanly nature, and you really help him access his true manly nature, you're both in a much, much healthier space and a much better space for the marriage. All right. And we could go on and on, but we don't have time. So very briefly, continuing our theme a little bit about woman, I want to find something in the Torah portion that related to that. So it's 9:18. I'll do this quickly. This week's portion is Yisro. Again, this is your Dvar Torah. This is the Torah thought you can share on Shabbos to impress your children and model for them that you love Torah and you have thoughts of it, and therefore you appreciate theirs and inspire them to do it because you're doing it. So in this week's Torah portion, we have the giving of the Torah. The most foundational thing in all of Torah is the giving of the Torah. It's this week's Torah portion. If you are in synagogue, if you're in shul, we stand as the Torah is being read, that portion of the 10 Commandments, because this is like, whoa, climactic. So to understand spiritually what was happening, and many things were happening, and we're only talking about one thing because we barely have time for this. Our sages explain that before the giving of the Torah, physical and spiritual were two worlds that did not meet. Our sages give a metaphor. They say, like Rome and Syria in those days. We might say like America and Russia, but they say like Rome and Syria. And there was a rule. Romans cannot go to Syria, Syrians cannot go to Rome. Never the twain shall meet. And that rule lasted and lasted until it was abolished. And when something happened and abolished it, whoa, now the Romans and Syrians can all melt. And that metaphorically was the giving of the Torah. Because until the giving of the Torah, physical and spiritual could not meet. And the giving of the Torah smashed through that decree, and now physical and spiritual can be one. What does that mean? What it means is if a man today takes a piece of leather, animal hide, which has been fashioned into tefillin, phylacteries, and puts them on, he's taking a piece of animal hide, a piece of leather, and making it godliness, holy, very holy. I mean, if tefillin become puzzle, if you can no longer use them, they have to be buried. They're shamus. Shamus means names, God's names. It's a piece of leather, it's a piece of animal hide. What do you mean God's names? I'm not talking about the parshias. I'm not talking about the parchment. I'm talking about literally the leather, the animal hide. Why is that God's names? Because a Jew made it godly. Because he took a piece of leather and he used it to serve God. It became so godly that if it's defiled in some way, it has to be buried. Let's go back to those patriarchs, Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov. If they had taken animal hide and made tefillin, it's a mitzvah. When they were done, nothing holy in that animal hide. It's animal hide. They did a mitzvah, but the animal hide is nothing. Why? Because physical and spiritual could not meet. They could serve God and be very spiritual, but that in no way impacted the physical world. Me, little me, I can do something they couldn't do. Literally, I can take a coin, put it in a charity box, put it in a pushka, and I just made that coin holy. Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov could not take a coin and make it holy. I can take a coin and make it holy. Why? Because the Torah was given and the decree separating the spiritual and physical realms was smashed. Now, what does that have to do with what we were talking about? Because we do this so much better than men. Again, going back to our ability, both from the idea of Malchus and the idea of Ban, both of the two Kabbalistic ideas we explained tonight, we have a much higher energy and a much better grip on the physical world. So when we use the physical world to serve God, we're just using it much better. We're much more in tune to it. We're much more in tune to raising it. And we literally can do it as a way man cannot. The Lubavitcher Rebbe speaks about his father-in-law and predecessor, that he focused, I mean, it might not sound so innovative, but for those times, like the 1930s, it was very innovative, that in the 1930s, in Riga, in Latvia, they began forming women's study groups. And these women were learning deep secrets of Torah, Hasidus, unheard of in those days. And it's like, whoa, like, is that appropriate? And people weren't sure it was appropriate. And the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, this is in the 1930s in Europe, pre-World War II, he was encouraging them. Why? Because he knew these are the women that are going to bring Mashiach. And he knew they need to study, they need to be empowered to take a lot of physical and make it very spiritual. Well, a man could also study and make physical spiritual. He could, but not as well. Why not? Because of the spiritual source, because we're from Malchus, because we're from Ban, we can do it better. Bottom line, we can do it better. We can take the physical and make it spiritual in a way surpassing a man's abilities. And that's the whole process to Mashiach, taking this physical world and making it God's. So as we do mitzvah, or it might necessarily officially be a mitzvah, but as we serve God with our physical life, which is what we're doing all day long, everything we interact with, all of those physical items, we lift them all up and make them God's and make them spiritual. And that ability happened with the giving of the Torah. And we've been doing it ever since. And that is the direct road to Mashiach. And that's why we do it so well, because again, we're the catalyst to bring Mashiach now. Thank you so much for joining. Sorry for that abridged version of the Dvar Torah because it's so late, but thank you so much for joining and for staying on for it. And I hope we all have much success in our very holy work of accessing ourselves as recipients, of accessing ourselves as nurturers, of accessing ourselves as givers, and to really see the changes that are going to happen because of that. Thank you so much.
Amen. Thank you, Mrs. Turn.